So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. This is Falcon Napier. Today we're going to continue our discussion on neurotransmitters. So to bring everybody up to speed, what we've been doing in recent discussions is we've been talking about each one of the neurotransmitters and how each neurotransmitter plays its role in the way that human beings operate. And what we've been trying to do is see how do these neurotransmitters actually overlay on the change grid. So based on the neurotransmitters description of impact, based on what triggers them or what they end up doing once triggered, we've been able to pinpoint, to whatever degree that's even realistic, where these might actually live on the change grid. And so far we've talked about the endorphin or adrenaline, epinephrine or adrenaline, and we said that it was very much connected to the perceived level of challenge. And even though people may have no ability to handle it or great ability to handle it, that level of epinephrine or adrenaline is still present. So the adrenaline rush is experienced and dealt with differently by someone who feels they have a significant ability to do that. In fact, someone brought up that adrenaline junkies actually seek out those kinds of risks in order to satisfy the addiction they have to those kinds of rush sorts of experiences. And the person who's very far up grid is having an adrenaline rush because their butt's in serious danger. So that seems to hold true. Happy to always do quicker with these later. Yeah, I did put in flight twice, didn't I? That should be fight. Sorry, pardon me. Changed it. Okay. And then we also talked a little bit about dopamine, or rather, I'm sorry, about norepinephrine and noradrenaline. And again, I think it was Brian who brought up that these really are very similar things chemically, and their similarity makes them compete to a certain degree for different receptor sites. And so if that receptor site is occupied by one, it is a bit less likely to be occupied by the other. Brian, do you want to clarify what I've just said there?
Yes, they're, as you said, they're chemically, they're structured the same, but their functionality becomes different based on the receptors that they connect to. They both connect to alpha and beta receptors. So norepinephrine only works with alpha receptors, and alpha receptors are found in the arteries, whereas beta receptors are found in the heart, the lungs, and arteries, and skeletal muscle. So that's why I said before, you're always experiencing some norepinephrine, right? So anytime you're doing something with effort, that's norepinephrine. Norepinephrine helped me when I was working out this morning. When I do a morning routine where I get up, I do some quick breaths. So I do all these things to kind of wake up the body, so to speak. So I do some quick breaths, and I mean quick, like we learned in martial arts to execute on a strike. And then I do a light workout where in this flat that I'm in, I walk from the 10th floor down. So I'm on the 10th floor. So I go up the stairs. I'm not running, just walking. Now, say I'm doing that, and all of a sudden I meet a pit bull. Well, I can guarantee you this new presentation of agitation and stress is going to move norepinephrine to epinephrine. So it's a direct perception of some kind of danger, some kind of harm present. And so that changes, and that's why it impacts the skeletal muscles. That's the true essence of fight or flight, because you're priming the body to move. And again, that's all really what an adrenal response is. It's just simply designed to get the body to move.
Excellent. And so what I did here was I showed the overlay. So the red obviously would be the true adrenaline, and then the blue would be the noradrenaline. And so what I pulled out of our dialogue was that we are always experiencing some level of noradrenaline. At a certain point, that level of noradrenaline becomes quite pronounced, and that brings with it all kinds of benefits in terms of focus and alertness and that sort of a thing. But at a certain point, I said, well, what if it becomes truly life-threatening? I thought initially that the noradrenaline would continue all the way up to a challenge of 12, and Brian pointed out that no, at a certain point in time, the noradrenaline would give way to the adrenaline taking over. So would you guys say that this diagram is at least conceptually representative of how those two neurochemicals would be behaving?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be precise. Who knows? I don't know. But conceptually, this feels that right to me that that at a certain point, yeah, who knows? Okay, other thoughts about adrenaline or noradrenaline? Okay, and then so let me tell you what we talked about on Tuesday. And again, we didn't have our specialists in the world of neuroscience or medicine about neurochemicals, so we kind of figured some things out, and I think made a couple of things up. So we'll kind of see. So we want to know, well, where does dopamine reside on the change grid, and where does serotonin on the change grid? And based on the descriptions of these, we ended up saying that dopamine would become more pronounced as someone moves off the center of the change grid in any of the four directions: out grid, up grid, in grid, or down grid. But we didn't believe they stretched all the way to the edges. And so now, just as a reminder, dopamine, feelings of pleasure, also addiction, movement, and motivation. People repeat behaviors that lead to dopamine release, pleasure. And so I wanted to revisit this just for a second to say, because they keep talking so much about pleasure, 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 I want to know, where does pleasure live on the change grid? So right now we're saying that there is that someone who is in the outgrid danger zone, who's out there at a 12-12, would not frame that experience as pleasurable. And then someone said to me, there's a lot of people who derive great pleasure and satisfaction from being abrasive, from being bullying, from being whatever it is. It kind of really does motivate them. It really does kind of give them some sort of, what do I say, reward, perhaps from an addictive sort of a perception. And then someone said, well, there are people who are also very far down grid who are just as happy can be. So they're feeling pleasure because there's really nothing going on that would be disrupting their pleasure. The people that are far in grid, and I'm talking about even further than what we're showing here, would they be experiencing pleasure? And to someone who's very far up grid, is that pleasure, if you're truly in a life or death situation, would that be pleasurable? And so this is the discussion that I'd like to kind of throw out there. So anyone have any thoughts they'd like to share with what I've just rattled about?
Yeah, one man's pleasure is another woman's pain. It's very true. It's a framing issue. There's things that aren't pleasant that some people really get off on. No question about it.
Yeah.
And so that's the same thing with adrenaline junkies. You know, is it healthy is a different question than is it stimulating?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so what is pleasure? It means that you are enjoying it. Well, what is enjoying? You find joy in it. And what is joy? So I don't think you can locate pleasure on the change grid per se, but you can locate things that are, you know, energy, whether they're relatively stable, and things that are frenetic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think according to that, if we look at how dopamine functions, right? So it's both excitatory and inhibitory. So dopamine and serotonin have kind of this push-pull relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, dopamine is based on the motivation, the reward, or even the anticipation of it. So we talked about the difference between moving out-grid and up-grid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference here when you talk about dopamine and serotonin. Like one is tends to be externally focused and one tends to be internally focused. So I think pleasure isn't the most useful word in here because dopamine and serotonin are both reward systems. And so then if we use the word terminology reward, we would say, okay, well, what is this reward based on? And that would give us kind of a baseline, if you will, where it possibly maps out on the change grid. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me show you one other thing we talked about last week. I forget if it was Kathy or Jane who brought up this complementary relationship between serotonin and dopamine. And so one of the things we said about serotonin is that serotonin is very much a centering sort of a neurotransmitter. It ends up creating a feeling of balance, peace, harmony, you know, a lack of agitation, all that. Well, that is strongest at the center of the change grid. And so as we move away from the center in any direction and things become more I want to say more extreme as far as that energy is concerned, we would watch the serotonin level change. And so we even talked about depression and anxiety and lots of the other things that come along with depression. And we said, well, those things kind of get triggered when you're away from the center. And so that's why with this diagram would show that as we move off center, the serotonin might reduce, but the dopamine would increase.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes
So,
sense to me. That's the push-pull relationship because remember we talked about how none of these transmitters or neurochemicals act alone. So I like the term that Jane used, neuroactive, because when we say things like neuroendocrine, neurohormonal, those is just simply describing how the neurotransmitters impact those areas. So, you know, the thing about dopamine and serotonin is they both connect to different receptors. That's what makes them uniquely different in terms of trying to experience them at the same time. For instance, serotonin tends to bond really well with oxytocin. And so oxytocin impacts serotonin and vice versa. Now, when you talk about dopamine, there's been studies in athletes on how the testosterone impacts that, and also in women, estrogen. So you have these kinds of effects that the communication between a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic and a targeted cells, this symbiotic relationship, it was what determines what is secreted and what isn't. 90% of serotonin is found in the gastrointestinal tract. 90%.
Brian, can
So
you
when we
bring
talk
that
about it,
to the change grid, especially the push and the pull? Because when you take the word pleasure, which is a perception of an experience, but you're talking very much in a chemical experience, how can you frame that then?
but think about it, if we're talking about where these are secreted and the hormonal impact, about the blood flow, how it impacts the heart, kidney functions, the response to stress. So all of these things will either drive you up or they're going to drive you down. So based on those perceptions.
And what about in and out in terms of the drive? Serotonin is more in-grid?
Yeah,
Dopamine's more
because that's
outgrid?
it. Yeah, because it impacts your mood, it impacts the circadian rhythms. So it's inhibitory. Whereas again, dopamine is both excitatory and inhibitory. See, these are what are called neuromodulators because of their impact on the central nervous system. And neuromodulators can impact an entire region. They have that kind of effect because of the hormone effect. See, this is where it starts to impact in terms of energy, metabolism, sleep cycles, all these different kinds of things. So we can begin to see, like, we're experiencing, again, too much of it all at once is not going to work in your favor.
And so again, if we go back, instead of the word pleasure, you mentioned reward. So again, going back to the change grid, I can certainly see how someone who's outgrid, and it doesn't matter how far outgrid they might go, they may very well derive pleasure from that experience, profound pleasure. I can also see how, and they would get a reward, obviously. That's what being outgrid is really all about. So how does the reward look differently? So Ellen, you have your hand up. Feel free to chime in. And who else is on the call? Diane, Edie, you guys all, Jane, you guys all feel free to chime in.
You know, one of the things that is striking me, if we go back to our action control model, how does this reward differ depending on the motivation for power, performance, and relationship?
Say that again.
So when we were talking about the action control model, one of the things we talked about were the three drivers: the people who are power oriented, the people who are performance oriented and people who are relationship oriented. And so the rewards are going to be different.
Right, right.
So
And see,
what constitutes a reward for me might be very different for you.
exactly. And see, this is why I said when we're talking about this, and I said before how the neurons communication, nervous system in general, is using a baseline point in terms of what is normal, what is good, what isn't. And so we've already trained our systems to respond to stress in different ways. In fact, we don't have to figure out stress. We don't have to figure out, the body's designed for it. What we really have to figure out is how to calm it down. Like, how do we reduce it? So our bodies are designed for adrenal response. This is why when it comes to communicating, emotions always get the upper hand, because you want to be able to process these senses like quickly. You don't want to have to sit and think about it. So when you talk about this reward part here, motivation, all of these things, and the anticipation, there's something called the dopamine marginal era. So just by anticipating some kind of reward, I will have the same, I could secrete the same effect as it would if I actually accomplished the reward itself. That's how powerful these things are when they're acting hormonally.
T?
Yes, Diane, go ahead.
What I love about your grid, well, there are many things, but the one thing that I think is most important right now is the word perceived.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's talking about these neurotransmitters as though they're kind of autonomous and they just spritz out, or they don't spritz out, or they spritz out too much. But I think we need to remember that the word perceived ability and perceived challenge is the switch that makes these neurotransmitters spritz out.
Mm-hmm.
The noise, oh my God, it could be a burglar, is going to make me feel very stressed. The noise, oh, thank God, that's my husband, is going to make me feel very pleased. So it's not that the neurotransmitters make you feel a certain way, although they do, but it's bi-directional. And when people realize that what they think can make more dopamine or more norepi or modulate it, that's what in my work as a therapist, the cognitive therapy gives people the power to ratchet down from anxiety or ratchet up from boredom by just making a little exercise, perceiving the way you change the way you perceive it, and you can actually change the neurohormones that are being secreted. What do you think, Brian?
And you can do that instantaneously, because remember on a previous call I said, if we think about the communication of the neurons, they basically do 5 things. The sensation, those are these receptors that are literally all throughout the body. Those are non-negotiable, because again, if you have to sit and think about you touching a hot stove and that is hot, you're going to be in trouble. If your body has to sit and think about it being overheated when you're in 150-degree weather, you would die. So those are non-negotiables. We just have to learn how to feel what it is that we're feeling. And this is the importance, again, of this tension management perspective, particularly when we're up at high levels of stress. So it has sensation. But then when you get down to like perception, that's negotiable. When you get down to emotions, emoto in Latin means movement. So when behavioral scientists are studying emotions, they're not studying what we call good, bad in terms of feelings. They're studying what triggered it. What's going on internally, what's going on externally. Then you get down to thoughts. Thoughts can be both spontaneous, they can be very deliberate, and that's what Diane is describing. Then you get down to the actions. So the neurons are communicating all 5 things, and they're bringing together this interoception and exteroception. They're trying to balance that. So they're trying to match the internal states with what's going on externally, how you're perceiving things externally. And this is always going on.
Ryan, this is Kathy.
Yes.
Would you explain the 5 things? You talked about sensation and emotions and perception, but what are the other 2?
The thoughts and actions. Because remember that the nervous system itself is looking at and communicating between our organs, is communicating the psychological effects and physiological effects, things that are going on with our body.
Okay.
And so, again, to try to bring this, is it true that in a fight or flight, or in a life-threatening situation, would dopamine be something that would be a serious contributor to our soup, or is it not likely to be present? So,
No, it'll be present, but again, if you're experiencing in a life and death situation, it may be distorted. Think about that recent shooting, right? So what people are questioning, the recent shooting in, was it Minnesota or Minneapolis or something like that?
it was in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah. So people are questioning, okay, if the guy has his back turned, you have 4 officers there, all of them have weapons. Why was it necessary to shoot him in the back? But what people don't understand is when you're in these high stress states, I think Jane explained it on the call, there's no reasoning going on. That's turned off. Those systems are turned off. When you're in high stress states, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, it'll be difficult for you to eat. We're talking about adrenal response. So you get these cortisol coming up from the gastrointestinal area, and it's very hard to digest food. So you have this effect on the body, literally. So there's not a lot of reasoning going on. So this reward of trying to control the situation is sheer without reasoning. It's a response.
And that reinforces what we all already know about the stress response, as we describe it in attention management. So reasoning is either going to be emotionally ruled or it's going to be logically ruled.
Exactly.
And as our level of tension goes further and further up, logic falls by the wayside. Emotionally ruled reasoning becomes the order of the moment, and people do things that are very reactive in terms of decision making. So that all feels like it goes together. Now, what I've done is I've just superimposed the dopamine and the adrenaline, just to kind of see, is that, now I'm actually showing you what soup looks like. So, and I don't know why I feel like I have to do that. This is part of the whole exercise of the merging of brilliance. Can we describe what the extremes would look like? Do they hold true? Things don't have to end up being a perfect shape when they overlay on the change grid. There's no reason why it has to take a square shape or a round shape. It could be any kind of like over here I could say, well, maybe it's really more of a, it's just over here a little bit, or maybe it's up over here. Maybe I need to flatten this top piece off. So, but I do know this for certain. There are places on the change grid where each neurotransmitter would be triggered, would be present, would be active, and other places on the change grid where it would be less so. Otherwise, we would all be having the exact same bowl of soup with everything in it in equal proportions at all times. And we know that's not the case. So,
Yes.
So we have to be able to say there is some way that each one of these neurotransmitters overlays on the change grid. And what I find is that sometimes how it overlays is going to be very obvious. Like it sounds very much like I'm going to find high levels of dopamine as someone's moves further and further out grid, becomes more driven, becomes more whatever, because they're in pursuit of a reward, and that's kind of triggering from doing that. But is it true if I say, well, the person who's very far down grid may experience that that pleasure in a different way, but nevertheless, they're still getting that reward, the reward that comes from knowing something and knowing something very, very well. Would it be true that someone who is upgraded at all would not be experiencing any kind of reward or pleasure? Well, the answer is obviously not. There's got to be some pleasure up there, because where we have here, this quadrant right here, a subquadrant, would be the The driven expressive. The driven expressive, one of the situations that would put you there is if you're in romantic pursuit of someone. That's the domain of the schmoozer. That's definitely all, seeking some sort of hedonistic sort of pleasure or some sort of reward. But I don't know, as I start to change this, make this bigger and bigger, is it true that dopamine exists in the upgrid danger zone where someone is truly physically threatened? Is it true that there is pleasure found, and I can kind of think of a way to describe this, that someone who's very far in-grid, and again, to be in-grid, you don't think you got much of an ability to do much of anything, and you don't think the challenge is really all that much, so you exist, but you don't necessarily live. You're certainly not active out there doing something, but we also know that ignorance is bliss, and just living a quiet, peaceful, off-the-grid kind of an existence, simplifying everything there is to know about life, can be a very pleasurable and rewarding sort of a state. So I'm okay with outgrid. That makes sense. I'm okay with downgrid. That makes sense. I'm kind of okay with ingrid. But is it true that there is some sort of a dopamine response when someone is as far upgrid as the upgrid danger zone?
I would say yes.
Yes, I would say yes.
Yeah, okay, describe that for me. Can you give me, Diane, you're great with coming up with scenarios. So,
Well, there's been some fabulous research on risk-taking behavior.
Exactly.
And, these people who bungee dive off things. When I do the presentation, I show a picture of me on a zip line in Costa Rica about 12 years ago, before it was popular. And again, I'm back to what you think. The other women at my dinner table on the cruise ship were saying, "Oh my God, you're going zip lining, aren't you afraid?" And what I was thinking was, this is going to be great fun. I hope in the photographs my hips don't look too wide. So it all depends on what you think. That's what brings the dopamine back to a more manageable level. The other thing I'd like to say about dopamine and addiction, sports figures, Mark Spitz, if I say Mark Spitz or Michael Phelps, we all have this image of a photograph of them standing there with 7 gold medals dangling around their chest, okay? The next picture you see, maybe 2 weeks later in the news, is they're at a party with a line of cocaine, smoking a joint. And we say to ourselves, why would somebody who has reached the pinnacle of all their life, they've been practicing and trying to excel, and they've reached the pinnacle, and now they're doing drugs? It's exactly because of that dopamine, because it felt so good to win. The guys playing basketball or football, they get to the state championship, the world championship, the Super Bowl. They are on a high because the challenge is high, their perceived ability is high. They are on top of the world when they win, and then crash the next day, 2 days. Oh, excrement. They are down as low as they can imagine without digging themselves a hole in the swamp. And then somebody says, "Here, have one of these. Come to this party. You'll feel better." And they give them the exogenous chemical to get that dopamine surge, and they're hooked. What do you think, gentlemen?
Yeah, see, and that's that dopamine, noradrenaline, and the testosterone, if we were to look at soup, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, well then, go ahead.
I think what perceived is the most important thing. I think changing your perception is the most powerful way to change and modulate these neurohormones. Bring them up, bring them down. That's what I think is the most important piece. Thank you.
Well, and I think that resonates very much with all different sorts of popular therapies. So certainly when I think about, is it cognitive behavioral?
Yes.
Therapy.
I think that's all about helping people with their perceptions of things. And the more that I've devoted my life to studying this whole change grid and the merging of brilliance and all that, the more I begin to wonder if reality even exists. You know, I mean, I really do. I mean, I suppose, but isn't reality, as someone else describes it, merely their perceptions of what it is?
You know, T, when we do training on the language and behavior profile, which has to do with how are you perceiving this current situation, Shelley Charvet starts out with, let's see, well, before we start here, let's find a place for reality. Where do we want to put it? Should we put it over here? And that's her way of saying that all of us are going to filter something very differently.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, because I remember when I was in college, one of the mandatory classes we had to take was Philosophy 101, and its subtitle was What We Mean by What We Say When We Talk About What We're Doing. And in this whole sort of thing, he said, the professor who had written the textbook that we were using said that reality is nothing more than an agreement between people. That, you know, that, and if you get sufficient people to agree about whatever, one would start to put that into the category of what's real, but it's still their perceptions.
I would like to comment here from an anthropological perspective. When you
Yes,
think
Kathy.
about culture,
Yes.
culture is a basic set of agreements, a shared beliefs among a group of people, and the reality of one culture can be quite different from the reality of another. So I have come to learn. I mean, I see reality as relative, and it varies. I mean, look at our own country, the different cultures in the United States, and the shifts, and how people, you know, we talk about alternate realities, alternate perceptions. So I tend to be on the side of thinking of reality as something that there is no one reality. There are many realities.
Yeah, that's where I am too. I don't think just because people agree on something that makes it reality.
Well, exactly. Well, in fact, I remember.
So I'm sort of where you are, T. That maybe there is no such thing.
Maybe there's no such
true
thing. I remember
reality.
one thing that I read, I forget who I got this from, but whatever, it said that there were two tests in order to declare something was real. Those two tests were, number one, you had to be able to describe it in terms of your 5 physical senses. So you had to be able to describe it in those sensory sorts of terms. And then the second thing was that you had to gain general consensus among all other sentient people that your assessment was correct. So they're perceiving it the same way. And if you couldn't do that, it could still be real. You just can't say that it's real because you can't prove it. So I thought, all right, that's fine. So it's all about perception. Okay, let me just throw serotonin into this mix, because Brian, Diane, we were talking about, I forget which of you brought up the idea that one ends up being reciprocal to the other.
That was me, and Brian knows this from listening to Huberman, Andrew Huberman. His discussion on toggling between serotonin and dopamine as a way to reach high performance throughout the day.
And so, Diane, let me ask you this: if someone's serotonin level was exactly textbook where one would hope it would be, what would they be feeling, thinking, believing? What would that internal experience be like for them?
You know, nobody ever asked me that question. Let's describe normal. I guess they'd be feeling good. I see people whose serotonin the level is good. The neurotransmitters, the neuroreceptors aren't receiving it. Isn't that interesting? It's not that they don't have enough serotonin. It's that their receptor sites aren't as sensitive to it, or it's broken down too quickly, that it reuptakes, it's broken down too quickly. So they don't feel good or comfortable or joy. T, nobody ever asked me what it's like to feel normal.
Well, that's because, let me describe the exact center of the change grid, and all you guys that are ChangeWorks certified should be able to make the same description. We have three little phrases we use to describe the center of the change grid. So when you're in the exact center, again, this is a place of perfect balance, etc. We would describe you as feeling in the world, but not of it. So you can maintain a certain distance from that. You let the winds of heaven dance around you. So you can observe all sorts of things happening in the world around you, but you can practice this art of caring detachment. So you're not in it at that particular moment in time, even though you're aware of what's going on. It's like you're on your own little private, perfect little island where everything is happy and harmonious and peaceful and balanced and zen and all those sorts of things. And from that place, your batteries are being recharged. You can, begin to decide if you feel like going and doing anything, moving off that center to live life as we know it. But there's this certain feeling of contentment, of bliss, of whatever.
And that sounds like serotonin to me. But I think what Diane was describing is the fact that what makes the difference, however, is, again, what receptor is connected there. And I'll give you an example of this real quickly. Let's talk about like what the neurochemistry of PTSD looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So, if someone's experiencing PTSD, there's an abundance of cortisol, but it's not just enough to say, oh, they have elevated cortisol levels, because what tends to happen when you have too much cortisol elevated like that, you're going to produce something called cytokines. Cytokines are a good thing because they help our white blood cells do what it's supposed to do in terms of protecting the immune system. However, in an inflamed situation, it could trigger microglia, and that combination, if you will, that soup, if you will, it's going to switch production of serotonin, which should likely happen. Instead, it's going to produce glutamate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Too much glutamate could be deleterious to your health. In fact, it's been shown that it could kill brain cells and in some cases cause death. So it's just not good. So again, it matters much in terms of that story, the perception of what's going on.
Very interesting, because we're going to get to glutamate in just a short while, but the most common brain neurotransmitter is glutamate. It's all about memory.
Yeah, see, glutamate is a main excitatory, whereas the abundance of glutamate, like if you're producing too much of it, it turns into GABA. And so
which is
GABA
the next
is
one.
the main inhibitory.
Okay.
So, yeah, see, these are two amino acids. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. So these are two amino acids, and amino acids are building blocks for proteins. So they become peptides. So they have this hormonal effect. So those two work together.
Interesting. Okay, so any other?
I have an answer to your question. I'm sorry, it took me a minute because nobody ever asked me to define normal. Back to that center, I would describe it in one word as interest. Interest. So something happens, isn't that interesting? I just did a very interesting, intelligent young lady is an engineer, and she was going to go visit home and was dreading it because there's arguments and infidelity and money problems, and they're always arguing, and there's nothing she could do, and she's feeling helpless and overwhelmed, and this is just going to be horrible, and she's leaving, she has to go. I suggested that she start to think of whatever happens as interesting. Oh, her father's going to say this or that. Isn't that interesting? That's his perception. Oh, the mother's going to cry or wail or complain about this or that. Gee, that's so interesting that that's the way my mother perceives it. Well, she just came back, gave me a big germ-free virtual hug, and said it was the best visit with her parents ever. Because no matter what anybody did or said, she sat back, said, that's interesting, and smiled. So again, I'm more interested in modulating these so that you're not too far up or down grid.
Exactly.
And it's the thought that does it. And this young lady just proved it to me that you could take somebody who feels frightened, not looking forward to something, wanting to avoid, and feeling helpless, and change her neurotransmitters by changing the perception. Thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Yeah. Now, Diane, I'll tell you that that resonates very much with what we talk about. The center of the change grid is a place that if your goal was to achieve some sort of peaceful, harmonious sort of state of being and enjoy all the good things that come there, we tell you that's the center of the change grid. And that's what our program about the Oracle of the Self is all about. How do you go about having conversations with yourself that bring you to that spot and help you to use it most effectively? And the most important thing that we say is that to be at that spot, you must practice the art of caring detachment. So it's her family. She cares about her family, but she cares enough about her family and she cares enough about herself to emotionally, intellectually, perhaps even physically detach herself from what's going on. So she can observe it all. She can find it very interesting. She might even find parts of it amusing, but she doesn't feel pulled into it. So,
Right.
and it's
That's
that
why
detachment piece that's most important, the objectivity that comes from detachment.
that's why they study serotonin. There's a lot of studies out, if you look it up, with serotonin, how it's impacted with exercises of gratitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. All right. So I like this. I think we're making some good progress. Let's go on to the next one. Let's talk about GABA. Now,
Could I ask a question before you move to that? Because I think
please do, Pamela. Yeah.
It goes back to what Brian was saying. When you were talking about cytokine, is that what you said?
Cytokine storms, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it dawned on me, that's one of the things that they've talked about happening with children who get COVID-19. Some of them have these cytokine storms.
Yes.
And that affects their immune system. So yes, thought and perception can affect all that, but so can physical things that really shock the body, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good observation.
So anyway, and so now that leads us to the next thing, which is what you were going to talk about.
Right. Well, but what you're talking about, I think, is really important. See, right now, all of our discussions about neurotransmitters, it assumes that the individual has nothing significantly unusual going on with their physiology.
Physically,
So, they may not all be identical because everyone's got their own little underlying whatever issues may be, but we have to recognize that those underlying issues affect the whole system. And so maybe people, and I don't know, I'm making this all up, but maybe people who are chronic sufferers from some sort of pain, that pain is going to in turn impact however their neurotransmitter, hormonal and neurochemical soup is getting served up. So maybe that's it. And certainly if we have some sort of an invader introduced into our physiology, that invader or coping with that invader could very well impact things going on too. So you got that. We have
see, that's really interesting and useful to me, T, because I've changed a lot of what I'm doing because I've been in pain. And I'm generally, a pretty upbeat person, but I have to really pay attention to what my mood is like based on the level of pain I'm experiencing.
Right. And again, it's about perception. So yeah, the pain might be triggering a part of what you're experiencing, but it's also triggering a thought process. And
you can adjust your thought process to overcome the effects.
Well, exactly. And so
of the pain.
Right. And so I think that sometimes if we think we are in pain, we are in pain. I don't want to in any way diminish that. But if we let our brain start to imagine the pain getting worse, or we start to fixate on the pain, as Brian has said, as Diane has mentioned, our brain doesn't know the difference between a state that is real and a state that is vividly imagined, and it wants to do whatever it can do to satisfy us. And so if we're having an experience that is unpleasant and totally independent of actual content or context, there's no reason to be feeling it, it's amazing how effective our brain is at coming up with some sort of a story to justify what we're feeling.
Well,
And
true.
if I can comment here on this, the value that I learned from somatic, one of the reasons that I started learning about somatic coaching, somatic approaches to coaching people, was that I discovered in my coaching that some people simply can't access the thoughts that we are talking about, which take you to a different, they can't access the thought that says this is interesting. They just can't access it for various reasons, whether they're deep trauma or whatever, and that it takes a somatic kind of intervention at times to have them feel, to get into their cell memory and release some of that so that they can actually access the thought. And so that's that's one of the reasons that I was drawn to learning about somatics in coaching, in addition to other approaches, to cognitive approaches to coaching and to change. So I just wanted to comment.
That's where your power is as the therapist, is to give them the thought that they never had before. I can remember having a kidney stone, which is supposed to be incredibly painful, and thinking, isn't this amazing? My body is trying to expel this object, and it's going to cause me pain until it expels. I wonder how long it will take. And really that thinking like that, or don't they do that when women are in labor? They have you time them. There's no reason to time them, except it gives you something else to think about.
Or find a focal point.
No, I would agree with that, because I do it all the time, because I have a lot of pain, and I operate all the time that way. But I'm just saying, some people have difficulty accessing that thought.
And that's why they need us. Yes.
Exactly. Well, I believe there are people who haven't experienced the center of their change grid for so long that they don't even know how to get back there. And they've never been there to begin with. They were born into a life of nothing but upgrid danger, or nothing but outgrid aggression, or nothing but downgrid, whatever. They don't even know what the center of the change grid feels like. And we got to do something to help people find themselves. And themselves is a
right lane to turn right onto the I-77 south ramp.
Someone's driving. Yes, be careful. You're in the car. Okay, so all right.
You know what, T?
Yes. Go ahead.
You know,
Edie.
and I got to turn that down. I'm driving. But when they can't access that thought, I do hypnosis for chronic pain, and I know one gal, after one session, was reduced 75%, got off 75% of her meds. So I just want to suggest, as an alternative, that when you're stuck, you can bypass that fence in the conscious mind by circumventing to the subconscious mind and get the job done. I just wanted to add that there's another, it's like a detour. It's a detour.
I would totally agree. And I do it through meditation as well. The hypnosis.
Yep, exactly.
But it is circumventing it. It's like you can't just do it through your conscious mind all the time.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's the observational piece of it. And I think that's what when you're not connected to it, you're observing it, the pain.
No, go ahead, Diane.
No, this is Ellen.
Oh, Ellen, yes.
One of the things I have been learning about recently and communicating with a physician in Austria about is his monitoring system for heart rate variability. And so when you get into the notion of how do you know yourself, you can monitor yourself for 1 day, 2 days, and so forth. And he then can graphically represent the heart rate variability and the concomitant things that go with that in your different experiences. So that becomes a way, as I understand it, of beginning to know what kinds of things can trigger things. There's things related. It's fascinating in terms of the number of things that supposedly can be determined from this, and then put things in place, whether it's breathing, whether it's some kind of psychotherapy, and things to really work on the autonomic response. And so he is sending me a monitoring system. So and I'm going to have the chance when it comes to really experience myself what it is that goes on with that, and then how these therapists, they've got about 1,100 of them in the German-speaking countries right now, of various persuasions. They've got some that are physicians, some that are psychotherapists, and so forth, who are using this to work with their clients and patients.
Very interesting, because I know heart rate variability is becoming a very important element to look at in terms of longevity, in terms of different kinds of health issues, physical issues that might be going on. So it's good to have variable heart rates. Yep.
You know what? Somebody asked a couple weeks ago about the expert on breathing. Was that Kathy or someone? Anyway, it's Jim Morningstar. He's probably the best in the world. He may be retired, but whoever he would recommend would be good. And I checked it, so I wanted to share.
Excellent. Good. Thank you.
Jim Morningstar. I think he's in Chicago.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so let me just say one last thing about going back to, I think, what Pamela brought up, and that is that at a certain point, we do need to factor in what's happening to someone that is either outside of them, so if someone gets sick or whatever, but also that there are lots of different disease issues or whatever that could be messing up your soup. So for example, we have a friend who deals with, I want to say trigeminal something or another, I forget.
Trigeminal neuralgia.
Neuralgia, thank you. What they have described to me sounds like torture.
It's very so. My mom has it.
And they said like the slightest little brush on the side of their face can send them into excruciating, unresolvable pain. And they were talking about the suicide rate among people with trigeminal neuralgia and all that. I'm going like, okay, that's got to affect your neurotransmitter soup. So,
absolutely. The trigeminal nerve is the main nerve, if you can imagine, the main nerve in the face. So it has, like, you know how sensitive your face is. Think about like a sciatica nerve in your face.
Yeah.
So that
constantly
pain,
firing and firing and firing.
Exactly. That pain, it feels like a burning sensation and like tension all at the same time. It is the worst pain ever.
Yeah. So I do think at a certain point it'd be good to talk about those sorts of things, because we do have clients who are dealing with underlying medical issues, or we do have clients who, might catch something. I mean, that it's got to all come into play. Now, I don't think that that's going to change the map of where these neurotransmitters overlay on the change grid. It's just going to say that condition tends to move you as an individual to a certain spot on the change grid. I don't think you can have trigeminal neuralgia and be down in apathy while you're having a flare-up. It's going to move you. So that becomes the question. Is the soup mixture, is the layout of these neurotransmitters impact zones static? But the soup changes based on where you happen to be on the change grid. And I think that's probably going to be more likely to be the case.
Yes.
Okay, so with that, now I do want to check in with you guys. Obviously, you guys are finding these conversations to be interesting, so or you wouldn't attend them. And I think it's a fascinating subject. But are you feeling like we need to pick up the pace and get through a lot more of them faster, or are you happy with the pace at which we're exploring these?
I love it. Me too.
I'm happy with it because we get to, the whole point is exploring. I mean, it's not a task. I don't want to think of it as a task.
Okay.
I want to think of it as a dialogue and an exploration, and I don't know how other people feel, but that's where I am.
No, that's
I
really
agree.
great. That's great. Good, good, good. Because I know that through all this dialogue, sooner or later, my little task will be satisfied and I'll have an understanding of where these overlay on the change grid. And then again, you know, as I said at the beginning of our call, when we're done with this dialogue, I will create a merging of brilliance video that just takes all the highlights, blends them together for the people who don't want to go through all the hours of conversations we've had and just want to know, what did this panel of experts come up with? What was the result of the discussions? And hopefully that'll be a video more aligned 15 or 20 minutes or something like that.
I
Okay.
think this was quite rewarding, let's put it that way.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
so glad. I'm so glad.
Can I just ask, this Jim Morningstar we were talking about, would he be the founder and director at Transformations Incorporated? Or is that
Is that in Chicago? I think he's in Chicago.
now this says something about Fordham University in greater Milwaukee area. Yeah, so that would be close.
That could be. I'm from Wisconsin originally, and I have friends that do everything in this arena. And they said he is the best. He might be retired, but yes, I do believe he once lived in Milwaukee. So he probably, yeah, that's probably him. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay, well.
And if you can't find him, let me know.
Thank you so much.
I think I found him, and he has multi-level awareness exercises and things like that.
Yep.
Excellent.
And he is the best. Yep.
We might need to take a deeper look at that when we finish this little series.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining in. So have yourself a safe and healthy and happy weekend, and we'll talk again on Tuesday. So bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.